mean I'll see it.
It started with a loose molar on a random afternoon while I was sitting at my desk, just minding my own business and scrolling through some emails. I felt that familiar, annoying wiggle with my tongue, and I figured I'd just have to call the dentist on Monday. But by that evening, the tooth didn't just feel loose, it felt like it was being pushed out from the root by something aggressive. I went to the bathroom, gripped the molar with a piece of tissue, and gave it a tiny tug. It didn't just come out, it practically launched itself into the sink with a wet, metallic thud. I stared into the mirror, expecting to see a bloody gap in my gums, but there was no hole. Instead, a tiny, needle-thin shard of something pitch black was already poking through the soft pink tissue. It was sharp, so sharp that when I accidentally brushed it with my fingertip, it sliced through the skin instantly. I didn't even feel the cut at first, not until I saw the dark crimson droplets blooming on my finger and falling into the porcelain basin. Over the next few days, the rest of my mouth followed suit. It wasn't a gradual process, it was a violent eviction. My actual teeth began to detach from my jaw in clusters. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my mouth full of enamel and gore, spitting out 3 or 4 white, healthy teeth at a time. Beneath them, the black things were waiting. They weren't just replacing my old teeth, they were multiplying. Within a week, my entire mouth was a construction site of obsidian-like fangs. They grew in concentric circles, rows upon rows of serrated, glossy triangles that didn't stop at my jawline. When I used a flashlight to look down my throat, I could see them spiraling deep into the darkness of my esophagus, like the inside of a leatherback sea turtle's mouth. The pain was constant, a grinding, pulsating ache that felt like my skull was being reshaped from the inside out. I tried to go to my regular family doctor, thinking maybe it was some freakish, rapid-onset bone cancer or a parasitic infection from something I'd eaten. The waiting room felt suffocating. I kept my mouth shut tight, my lips pressed together so hard they turned white, because I could feel the new fangs slicing into the inner lining of my cheeks. When the doctor finally called me back, he was his usual cheerful self, asking me about my work and my hobbies. He told me to open wide, and I did. I didn't have a choice anymore. The pressure was becoming unbearable. The second the light from his headlamp hit my mouth, his entire face went gray. He didn't scream. He just made this tiny, pathetic whimpering sound in the back of his throat. He dropped his wooden tongue depressor and took a step back, his eyes bulging as he looked at the black, needle-filled abyss where my tongue used to be. He hit the floor before I could even explain, his body going limp as he fainted from pure, primal shock. I looked down at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel empathy. I didn't feel the urge to call for help or check his pulse. All I felt was a localized, stinging heat in the back of my brain. I felt hungry. Not the kind of hunger you get when you skip lunch, but a hollow, screaming void that demanded to be filled. I looked at the exposed skin of his neck, and my jaw unhinged further than any human jaw should be able to. I could feel the rows of black needles quivering, ready to shred. I barely managed to stumble out of the office, covering my face with a sleeve, and drove home in a daze, my vision tunneling into a red haze. Since then, things have moved much faster. I've retreated to my basement because I can't stand the light anymore. Everything in my house smells like a wet, rusted iron pipe left out in the sun. It's the smell of my own changing chemistry, the scent of something ancient and predatory waking up inside me. I tried to eat a bowl of soup a few days ago, but the liquid tasted like literal ash and bile. My body rejected it instantly, cramping so hard I was doubled over on the cold concrete floor for hours. I found out the hard way that the only thing that stops the cramping is protein. Raw, pulsating protein. I've gone through every bit of meat in my freezer, steaks, chicken breasts, even the frozen ground beef. I don't even thaw it. I just press the frozen blocks against the black needles and let them do the work. They don't chew, they shred. They turn solid muscle into a fine, crimson pulp in seconds. But even that isn't enough anymore. It has to be warm. If the heat of life has left the meat, my stomach turns, and the hunger just grows sharper, more insistent. My hands are changing now, too. The skin around my cuticles began to split open 2 days ago, and these thick, curved talons have started to slide out. They're about 6 inches long now, hard as tempered steel and dark as the fangs in my mouth. I can't even hold a pen or use my phone properly. I'm typing this by hitting the keys with the blunt side of my knuckles, moving slowly so I don't shatter the keyboard. My fingernails, the human ones, are just hanging on by threads of dead skin, ready to drop off like my teeth did. The basement is the only place I feel safe, but even here, the walls feel like they're closing in. I've turned off all the lights. I can see perfectly fine in the dark now. Everything has this weird, thermal glow to it. I can see the mice scurrying behind the drywall, their tiny hearts beating like frantic little drums. I can hear the blood rushing through their veins, a sound like a distant, rhythmic thrumming that makes my mouth water. Yesterday, I caught one. I didn't even think about it. I just lunged, my body moving with a speed and fluidity I never possessed as a man. The taste of it, the hot, salty spray of it hitting the back of my throat, was the only time I felt normal in weeks. But a mouse is nothing. It's a drop of water in a desert. I'm starting to forget things. I look at the pictures on the walls of the upstairs hallway, photos of a man with a soft face and a kind smile, and I don't recognize him. I know that used to be me, but the memory feels like a movie I saw a long time ago. My name. I try to say it out loud, but my vocal cords have thickened and morphed. All that comes out is a low, vibrating growl that vibrates in my chest cavity. The hunger is a physical weight now, a thick, suffocating presence that sits on my lungs and tells me to go outside. It tells me that there is a whole world of warm, moving things just beyond the basement door. I can hear my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, mowing his lawn right now. Through the small, dirt-streaked basement window, I can see his thick, fleshy ankles moving back and forth. I can smell the sweat on him, the salty, fatty scent of a human being who has no idea he's being watched. My jaw is aching again, the black rows of teeth grinding against each other with a sound like sharpening knives. The most terrifying part isn't the teeth, or the talons, or the fact that I'm turning into something that belongs in a nightmare. The terrifying part is that I don't want to be saved anymore. I don't want a doctor, and I don't want a cure. I just want the stinging heat in my head to stop. I just want to be full. I'm looking at the door now. The wood is thin, and the lock is weak. My talons are twitching, leaving deep, jagged gouges in the concrete floor as I shift my weight. I think I'm going to go upstairs now. I think I'm going to go say hello to Mr. Henderson. I just hope, for his sake, that I can remember how to act like a person for just a few more seconds, long enough to get close. Because once I open my mouth, there's no going back to being the man in those photographs. There is only the black row, the hunger, and the red.
Next story.
I always had pretty clear skin, so when the clusters started appearing across my shoulder blades, I just figured it was a reaction to a new laundry detergent or maybe just sweat from the gym. They looked like deep, stubborn blackheads at first, just tiny, dark pinpricks buried under the surface. I bought some of those charcoal exfoliating scrubs and spent 20 minutes in the shower every night rubbing my skin raw, waiting for them to clear up. But they didn't. Instead, they started to multiply, spreading down the center of my spine in a perfect, vertical line, like some kind of subterranean braille. The itching was the first thing that really got to me. It wasn't a normal itch, the kind you can satisfy with a quick scratch. It felt internal. It felt like something was vibrating just beneath the dermis, a low-frequency hum that made my muscles twitch involuntarily. I'd be sitting at my desk at work and suddenly my entire back would ripple, a wave of movement that I couldn't control. It felt like a bag of live bait was being stitched into my muscle fibers. People started noticing I was restless. I couldn't sit still. I'd lean back against the hard plastic of my office chair just to try and crush whatever was happening back there, but the pressure only made the humming louder. About a week into this, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror with a pair of tweezers and a handheld magnifying glass, twisting my torso at an awkward angle to get a better look. The pores had changed. They weren't black anymore. They had turned a dull, bruised purple, and the skin around them was stretched so thin it looked like wet tissue paper. I picked the largest one, right between my shoulder blades, and pressed down hard with the tips of the tweezers. I expected a pop. I expected that familiar, satisfying release of a clogged pore. But nothing came out. Instead, the pore yawned open, wider than it should have been able to, and something caught the light. It wasn't pus or oil. It was a sliver of something iridescent, a thin, translucent edge that looked like a shard of stained glass. I gripped it with the tweezers and pulled. A sharp, electric jolt of agony shot through my nervous system, so intense that my knees buckled and I hit the tile floor. I panted, sweat instantly soaking my shirt, but I didn't let go. I pulled again, slowly this time. A tiny, wet wingtip emerged from my body. It was damp and folded over itself, shimmering with a sickly, oily sheen. As it cleared the surface of my skin, I felt a horrific sensation of vacuum-sealed space being filled. It wasn't just in the pore, it was attached to something deeper. I realized then that my pores weren't clogged. They were being used as vents. I crawled back to the mirror, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked at the hole I just created. It wasn't bleeding. Instead, a clear, yellowish fluid was weeping from the opening, and it had a scent that made my stomach turn, not the metallic tang of blood, but something cloyingly sweet, like rotting peaches left out in a damp basement. I looked closer, and I saw movement. Inside the hole, something small and dark shifted, retreating further into the warmth of my flesh. Over the next few days, the transformation went from a localized irritation to a total systemic takeover. I stopped going to work. I couldn't wear clothes anymore. The feeling of fabric touching my back was like dragging sandpaper over an open nerve. I spent most of my time lying face down on my bed, feeling the crop mature. The humming had turned into a literal grinding sound. I could hear it in my ears, the sound of thousands of tiny, chitinous legs scraping against the underside of my ribs. My skin started to lose its elasticity. It felt brittle, like old parchment that had been soaked in oil and left to dry. It began to unzip. That's the only way I can describe it. A long, jagged fissure opened up right along my spine, starting at the base of my neck and tearing slowly downward. It didn't hurt anymore. That was the most terrifying part. The pain had been replaced by a sickening sense of readiness. The nerves were being severed or bypassed entirely. I remember standing in the bathroom, watching my reflection as the edges of the great rift curled back. My old skin was sloughing off in dry, gray flakes, falling to the floor like ash. Underneath, I could see the new layer. It wasn't human. It was a deep, pulsating violet, covered in thousands of tiny, geometric plates that shifted and locked together as I moved. It looked like armor. It looked efficient. I reached back and touched the exposed muscle of my shoulder, but my fingers didn't meet soft tissue. They met something hard and cold. I realized that my body, the me I had known for 26 years, was just the scaffolding. My bones were being hollowed out to provide more room for the swarm. I could feel them now, distinct and individual, thousands of tiny heartbeats drumming in sync with my own. They were drinking from me, turning my marrow into the fuel they needed for the flight. The smell in the apartment was unbearable now. That rotten sweet odor had permeated everything, the curtains, the carpet, my own hair. It was the smell of a hive. I looked at my hands and saw the fingernails beginning to lift away from the beds, pushed out by sharp, black hooks emerging from underneath. I wasn't even scared anymore. The panic had been replaced by a cold, predatory clarity. I found myself thinking about the sky. I found myself looking at the window and feeling an intense, localized pressure in my chest, a need to be higher up, to be somewhere where the wind could catch the wings that were currently unfolding inside my thoracic cavity. Last night, the first one hatched. I was lying on the floor because the bed felt too soft, too suffocating. I felt a sudden, sharp pop near my waist, followed by a wet, fluttering sound. I didn't have to look to know what it was. I could feel its tiny feet prickling against my raw, exposed new skin as it climbed out of the husk of my old lower back. It stayed there for a moment, vibrating its wings to dry them. The sound was like a miniature chainsaw. Then it took off. I watched it fly across the room, a beautiful, horrific thing with a bloated, translucent abdomen and eyes that seemed to reflect every light source in the room at once. It landed on the wall and waited for its siblings. Now, the unzipping is almost complete. My old skin is hanging off my frame in long, tattered ribbons, looking like a discarded coat. I can see my ribs through the gap in my back, but they aren't white anymore. They've been coated in a thick, black resin. The me that is left is just a hollowed-out shell, a protective casing for the thousands that are currently biting their way through the last layers of my old muscle. I looked in the mirror one last time before my eyelids started to fuse into the new, transparent membranes. I expected to see a monster. I expected to see a corpse being piloted by parasites. But when I looked at the shimmering, violet thing reflected back at me, the way the light danced off the iridescent scales, the way the many-jointed limbs moved with such terrifying grace, I didn't feel horror. I've never looked more beautiful. I can feel the pressure building in my lungs now, but I'm not gasping for air. I'm breathing for them. My heart is beating its final, sluggish cycles, pushing the last of my fluids into the waiting mouths of the swarm. The wall in the living room is already covered in hundreds of them, their wings creating a rhythmic clicking sound that feels like a lullaby. The most gut-wrenching part of this isn't that I'm dying. It's the realization that I was never the main character in my own life. I was just the soil. And the harvest is finally here. I'm going to open the window now. Not because I want to escape, but because they need to feed, and I can feel how hungry they are getting. I'm almost gone, and honestly, the thought of finally shedding this dry, useless skin for good is the only thing that feels right anymore. I'm not a person. I'm a sky full of wings, waiting for the first gust of wind.
Next story.
There is a specific kind of dread that sets in when you realize your own reflection is a stranger. It doesn't happen all at once, like some jump scare in a movie. It's a slow, rotting realization that crawls up your spine over the course of months. I remember looking into the bathroom mirror one morning, the fluorescent light flickering with a buzz that felt like it was drilling into my skull, and seeing someone I didn't recognize. My cheekbones were higher, sharper, almost as if the bone beneath the skin was being sanded down and reshaped by invisible hands. I reached up to touch my face, expecting to feel the familiar softness of my own features, but my fingers met something hard and alien. The skin felt like damp parchment pulled too tight over a frame that didn't belong to me. My eyes, which I knew for 28 years were a pale, watery blue, had deepened into a muddy, suffocating brown. It wasn't just a trick of the light. The pigment had bled away, replaced by a darkness that seemed to swallow the room's reflection. I tried to tell myself it was stress. I was working too much, sleeping too little. Maybe it was some weird hormonal shift or an undiagnosed illness that was wasting me away in a very specific, symmetrical fashion. But then the hair started changing. I used to be blonde, fine, light hair that I'd inherited from my mother. Now, it was coming in thick and dark, the color of wet earth. And the scar appeared. It's a jagged, ropey line of pink flesh that runs from the corner of my mouth down to the base of my chin. I don't remember falling. I don't remember a fight. It just manifested one night, itchy and raw, as if the skin had simply decided to split open and heal into a shape it preferred. The most terrifying part wasn't the physical change, though. It was Sarah. My wife would sit across from me at the dinner table, picking at her food, laughing at my jokes, and kissing me goodbye every morning. She never blinked. She never asked why her husband was turning into a completely different human being. To her, I was the same man she married. But when I looked at our wedding photos on the mantle, the man in the tuxedo had blue eyes and a rounded jaw. When I looked back at her, she was smiling at a man with a scarred face and brown eyes. It felt like I was living inside a hallucination that everyone else had agreed to participate in. A few days ago, I was standing at the bus stop, the wind biting through my jacket, when I saw the poster. It was faded, the edges curled and yellowed by years of rain and sun. It was a missing persons flyer. "Have you seen David?" it asked in bold, blocky letters. Below the text was a photo of a man who vanished 10 years ago. I felt the air leave my lungs. The man in the photo had my new face. He had the same sharp cheekbones, the same dark eyes, and that exact same jagged scar running down his chin. I stood there for a long time, the world around me blurring into a gray smear. I looked like a ghost that had been missing for a decade. Or rather, the ghost had finally found a way back, and it was using my skin to do it. When I got home, the silence in the house felt suffocating, like a thick, invisible shroud draped over the furniture. Sarah was out, and the emptiness of the room seemed to pulse with a rhythmic, low-frequency throb. I felt a sudden, frantic urge to find something, anything, that proved I was still me. I went to the bedroom and started tearing things apart. I ripped the clothes out of the closet, threw the pillows off the bed, and finally, I began pulling up the rug. Near the corner of the room, under the heavy oak dresser, I noticed one of the floorboards was slightly loose. I used a screwdriver to pry it up, but was groaning and splintering under the pressure. Tucked away in the dark, dusty crawl space was a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and stained with something dark and crusty. I opened it, and the smell hit me immediately. It didn't smell like old paper. It smelled like a butcher shop at the end of a long, hot day, the sickly, sweet, iron-rich stench of blood that has begun to turn, mixed with the sharp tang of bile. The handwriting inside was mine. It was my slanted, messy script, the way I crossed my T's and looped my O's. But the dates were all wrong. The first entry was from 1994. I would have been a child then, but the writing was that of a grown man. I turned the pages, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The entries were short at first, describing a process of alignment and reclamation. Then, they got more graphic. The writer described the sensation of his old skin sloughing off in the shower, the way he had to peel the dead, translucent layers away to reveal the new, dark hair underneath. He talked about the taste of his own blood as his jaw unhinged and reset itself in the middle of the night. "The metamorphosis is almost complete," the last entry read. It was dated only a few days ago. The host's memories are finally fading. I can feel his childhood slipping away, the faces of his parents becoming blurred and gray. His thoughts are getting quieter, like a radio being turned down in another room. I am him now. The skin fits. The eyes see what I want them to see. There is only a small piece of him left, a tiny, screaming knot in the back of the brain, but that will be gone by morning. As I read those words, a wave of nausea washed over me. I looked down at my hands. They were pale and trembling, but the fingernails were different, longer, thicker, and slightly yellowed. I ran my tongue over my teeth and realized they felt too large for my mouth, crowded and sharp. I heard the front door open. Sarah was home. "Honey? Are you up there?" Her voice drifted up the stairs, sounding unnervingly sweet. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt weak, the muscles sliding under the skin like bags of wet sand. I stumbled toward the bathroom, the journal still clutched in my hand. I needed to see. I needed to know how much of me was left. I grabbed the edge of the sink and pulled myself up to the mirror. The light didn't flicker this time. It stayed steady, illuminating the horror in high definition. The transformation was nearly finished. My skin was a sickly, mottled gray-brown, and the scar on my chin was pulsing, a deep, angry red. But it was the eyes that broke me. There was no white left in them. They were just two bottomless pits of dark, oily brown. As I watched, a bead of sweat rolled down my forehead. Except it wasn't sweat. It was thick and dark, a viscous fluid that leaked from my pores like grease from a piece of rotting meat. I reached up to wipe it away, and a chunk of my forehead simply slid off. It didn't hurt. That was the worst part. It just detached, falling into the porcelain sink with a wet, heavy thud. It looked like a piece of raw chicken that had been left in the sun for a week. Underneath the patch of missing skin, there wasn't bone. There was something else. It was moving, a wet, glistening mass of black fibers that twitched and knitted together, reaching out to bridge the gap I had just created. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Sarah wasn't rushing. She knew. "It's almost time, David," she called out. Her voice had changed. The sweetness was gone, replaced by a flat, metallic drone that didn't sound human at all. The transition is so much easier if you just stop fighting it. Think of it as an evolution. You're not dying, you're just becoming the vessel we need. I looked down at the sink. The piece of my old face was still there, twitching slightly in the drain. The smell in the bathroom was unbearable now, the stench of a cavity, of deep-seated infection and ancient, stagnant fluid. It filled my lungs, making every breath feel like I was inhaling liquid rot. I tried to scream, but my throat felt like it was filled with wet wool. Only a wet, gurgling sound came out. I looked back into the mirror and saw the missing man from the poster. He was smiling at me. Not a kind smile, but a hungry one. His lips, my lips, pulled back to reveal rows of teeth that were far too numerous, needle-thin and stained with something dark. The bathroom door creaked open. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just watched in the glass as Sarah walked in. She didn't look horrified. She looked proud. She reached out a hand, and as her fingers brushed my shoulder, I felt a coldness spread through my body, a numbing frost that started at the point of contact and raced toward my heart. "There you are," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the stranger in the mirror. "Welcome back, David. It took so long to find a host that wouldn't reject the craft." I felt my consciousness beginning to flicker, like a candle in a drafty room. The memories of my life, my first car, my mother's face, the day I met Sarah, were dissolving, melting away into a gray sludge. I reached out one last time, trying to grab the edge of the sink, but my fingers wouldn't obey. They were thick and stiff, the skin fused into a single, blunt mass. The last thing I remember before the dark took me completely was the sensation of my own eyes sliding back into my skull, pushed aside by the thing that was moving in to take their place. I am still here, somewhere deep inside, but I am no longer the one driving. I am just a passenger in a body that looks like a man who died 10 years ago, watching through a veil of dark oil as I reach out to hug my wife, my hands slick with the grease of my own decaying soul.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.